have the committee members here, quorum. We will call the meeting to order. I want to thank the witnesses for coming forward. I also want to remind the committee that we have extended our panel somewhat. We had originally had 5, we have 7. And so we've asked the comments for each of them to be limited to 7 minutes maximum. Please don't feel compelled to use all 7, but nonetheless, we'll try to move it along as quickly as possible. I also remind the committee that we have bells that will start at 5:30 for votes, or 5:15 for a vote at 5:30. So it's going to cut our time a little bit. And I do want to leave 5-10 minutes at the end for discussion with regard to our last meeting and my comments that, or my dialogue that I had with the chair of the Immigration Committee with regard to C-50. So with that, we will move right along. We want to, first of all, focus our attention on C-50. That's what our witnesses are here to discuss with us. We have, first of all, from the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, David Stewart-Patterson, Chief Executive. Mr. Patterson, the floor is yours, and I'll introduce the others as we yield them the floor. So 7 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the members of the committee for the opportunity to appear. I think the views of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives on Budget 2008 as a whole are as a matter of record, and I'm not going to go into them in great detail here. I believe that the budget as a whole did build on the October economic statement by adding some important measures that will have a positive impact on Canada's competitiveness at relatively low cost to the Treasury. I've just returned from Calgary, where we had a meeting of our members with all 4 of Canada's Western premiers in turn, the premiers of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. We also had a roundtable discussion on the state of the economy. Clearly, the outlook in Western Canada is pretty robust. In Ontario, Quebec, parts of Atlantic Canada, considerably more troubling. I think the subprime mortgage crisis in the United States clearly spilling over there into real estate prices, making it harder for businesses and consumers to borrow in that country, and it's clearly going to spill over into our country to some extent. All of that simply to say it reinforces the need for a prudent approach to fiscal policy and to the management of public spending. If I may, let me address 3 specific provisions in Bill C-50 that I think support the broad thrust of the budget: employment insurance, student aid, and immigration. On the first, we strongly support the creation of the proposed Canada Employment Insurance Financing Board. I think the business community has argued for many years that employment insurance premiums should be set by an arm's-length body on a break-even basis, and that the funds collected through these premiums should be managed in a segregated fund. We do have a continuing concern about the tendency to use the employment insurance system to provide benefits that might better be characterized as social programs. And over the longer term, we believe that money raised through employment insurance premiums should be focused more precisely on its core mandate of providing insurance against temporary job loss, and that other programs should be funded through general revenue. However, that said, the creation of the new board marks a critical step in the right direction. Next, let me speak to the issue of student aid. In an increasingly knowledge-based economy, we must ensure that every single Canadian is both able and motivated to participate and succeed in post-secondary education. Now, when I say post-secondary, that may be through university or college, it may be through apprenticeships, it may be through training and lifelong learning, both within and beyond the workplace. Canada Millennium Scholarship Foundation got off to a rocky start, but over time it found ways to work constructively with provincial governments, and I believe became a catalyst for innovation in improving access to post-secondary education in this country. The government has opted to dissolve the foundation and replace its scholarships with a new and hopefully more robust approach to student aid. The design of the new rules is going to be critical in ensuring that the federal resources allocated to student aid are as effective as possible in overcoming the financial barriers to success in post-secondary education. I also believe the government should move to preserve and build upon the research capacity developed through the foundation. And here I would suggest passing its research mandate and funding to the Canadian Council on Learning, which I believe has become an important and credible source of information about how Canada is doing in the field of education and what policies work best in enabling every Canadian to achieve his or her full potential. Finally, Mr. Chairman, let me speak to the provisions of Bill C-50 that affect immigration. Canada is facing serious and growing shortages of skilled labor. These shortages are most acute in the resource sector, but they are affecting businesses of all sizes in every industry and in every region of this country. These shortages are only going to get worse as our population ages. Both Canadian employers and potential immigrants today face a huge frustration, a backlog of some 900,000 applications that under current rules have to be processed in the order they're received. The result is that a skilled worker ready to contribute to Canada's economy faces a wait of up to 6 years before even having his or her application processed. And my understanding is that that delay could grow to 10 years as early as 2012. This legislation would give the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration some discretion to set priorities within the system. It would help in particular to speed the flow of immigrants with skills that are urgently needed in our economy. While any legislative provision for ministerial discretion may cause concern, the process outlined in this bill for issuing ministerial instructions does provide both transparency and accountability. The fact is that the current system is not working. It's not working for immigrants, and it's not working for Canada. We need improvements now, and we cannot waste years more in pursuit of perfection. Whatever flaws anyone may see with the process proposed here, it does represent a clear improvement that will start to make a difference right away. On all three of these issues, employment insurance, student aid, and immigration, Bill C-50 moves public policy toward better solutions. In each case, there is more work to be done, but we support the intentions of the bill, and we are prepared to work with the government to ensure that the resulting new programs and institutions achieve the best results possible for Canadians. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Very much. You led by a great example. Your timing was bang on, and I appreciate that very much. So thank you. We'll now move on to the Chinese Canadian National Council. We have Victor Wong. The floor is yours. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Chinese Canadian National Council is a community leader for Chinese Canadians in promoting a more just, respectful, and inclusive society. Founded 28 years ago, CCNC is a national nonprofit organization with 27 chapters across Canada. Our mandate is to promote the equality, rights, and full participation of our community members in all aspects of Canadian society. As a national anti-racism and human rights organization, we believe that legislation and public policies must reflect the democratic, humanitarian, and social justice values that are commonly shared by Canadians, and that such policies should enhance the ability of everyone, including newcomers, to make an important contribution to the future of this country. According to the 2006 census, there are more than 1.3 million Chinese Canadians living in Canada, and we are the second largest racialized community in Canada. The Chinese Canadian community is a diverse community with a rich, though sometimes tragic history, spanning 150 years in this country. Our community was subjected to racist immigration legislation in the form of the Chinese head tax, Newfoundland head tax, and Chinese Exclusion Act, and also subjected to various exclusionary policies and programs and practices at the local level. It is this direct experience with exclusionary immigration legislation that guides us in formulating the following analysis and constructive suggestions for your consideration. I'd like to speak specifically to the proposed immigration changes in Bill C-50. First of all, we must recognize that immigration is integral to nation building. Prime Minister Stephen Harper recently stated that the government favors an aggressive immigration policy. Yet, the government's approach to immigration has been less than inspiring. We need to be visionary, as opposed to applying a just-in-time business model. Immigration is not about filling regional labor market shortages with just-in-time labor, and CIC is not a temp agency. There are three key words that I would propose that could guide us in our strategic vision on immigration: nation, dignity, and choices. We should be building a nation of active citizens. So our first recommendation is that we need a comprehensive immigration plan, one that offers a clear path to legal status and citizenship. We know that Canada's population is aging. More and more workers are retiring as the baby boomers turn 65 years of age, beginning in year 2011. The birth rate is low. With the right vision, we can develop the proper plan based on an aggressive immigration policy. The proposed immigration changes in Bill C-50 are not the answer. When these proposed changes were first introduced back in March, Immigration Minister Finley said that they were needed in order to address the backlog in applications. However, when we carefully read the proposed changes, we find that they apply to applications received on or after February 27, 2008. So in other words, these proposed changes do not apply to the existing backlog of applications. Therefore, these changes shouldn't even be in the budget implementation bill. The government has suggested that these changes will help process applications more quickly, yet over the last 3 years, we find that Canada has, by and large, met its immigration target range. We've received an average of 250,000 immigrants every year for the last 3 years, 237,000 in 2007, 252,000 in 2006, and 262,000 in 2005. These applications were processed with the existing complement of staff resources. So in other words, we're already at or near our capacity. Even if we are more productive and process our yearly target of 250,000 immigrants, let's say within 9 months of the year, we'd have to stop processing applications because we would be at the limit of our target range. So we cannot reduce the backlog unless we increase the immigration target range. So our recommendation is that we increase the immigration target range from 240,000 to the target range, which is 240,000 to 265,000, to increase that range to 300,000 to 330,000, which is around 1% of the Canadian population. In conclusion, there is a lack of transparency around C-50. This fosters the current climate of mistrust. The Immigration Department has had weeks to table a revised immigration plan so that we can track the impact of these changes. Our recommendation to the Finance Committee is that you recommend or you make an amendment that these proposed immigration changes in Bill C-50 be withdrawn, and that the government instead issue a proper discussion paper and organize national consultations before drafting legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Pierre Sereg from the CNC. The floor is yours. 7 minutes.
Bonjour. Dans un premier temps,
First and foremost, on behalf of our organization, the Conseil national des chômeurs et chômeuses, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the MPs from the various parties represented on the Standing Committee on Finance. Our organization represents various groups of unemployed persons, some that have been working for about 30 years, informing people and defending their rights. We have been on the front lines of many public opinion campaigns criticizing the misappropriation of the Employment Insurance Fund and above all demanding a better employment insurance system. I'm here today to share our views on the upcoming establishment of the Employment Insurance Financing Board as set out in Part 7 of Bill C-50. We have done our homework. We have examined this bill very thoroughly. We have also compared it, Mr. Chair, with the current Employment Insurance Act. In our opinion, most of the provisions in Bill C-50 do not change much of the current Employment Insurance Act. Allow me to give you a few examples. Section 66 of the current Act already provides that, and I quote, the premium rate should generate just enough premium revenue to cover the payments that will be made. Section 66(2) of the current Act states that the premium rate for a year may not be increased or decreased by more than 15/100% Section 66.3 states that the Governor and Council may substitute a premium rate if it considers it to be in the public interest. This is also provided for in Bill C-50, whereas it already figures in the current piece of legislation. There is, however, one difference between the current situation and the planned establishment of the Employment Insurance Financing Board. I'm talking about the creation of an independent account. The creation of such an account would mean that workers' contributions remain in the fund and can no longer be used for other purposes. This, Mr. Chair, is a significant difference. And we all know that ever since 1995 to March 31st, 2007, it has been calculated that the government confiscated $54.1 billion from the fund and used it for other purposes. Monty Sahlberg, the Minister of Human Resources, appeared most recently before the Committee on Human Resources and acknowledged the surpluses and that they had been confiscated and misappropriated. He stated that this must not happen again. We agree. The establishment of the new Crown Corporation for the sole purpose of managing the fund and setting premium rates is welcome news. However, and as we stated before, very little has changed. Most of the provisions of the bill were already in effect and under the Commission's responsibility. In other words, it would have been possible to envisage the establishment of an independent account under the control of the Employment Insurance Commission, which would carry out the mandate of the announced Employment Insurance Financing Board. In either case, with or without the Financing Board, under the Commission's responsibility or not, this would still not solve all the problems. Some problems are in fact not addressed at all. In our opinion, the Employment Insurance Financing Commission does not resolve the confiscation of the accumulated $54 billion surplus, nor does it address the improvements needed to the employment insurance system in order to provide better financial protection for workers between jobs. On the first point, we propose amending Section 80 of the bill as follows, and it can be found on page 120 of the bill. If amounts accredited to the account are not sufficient for the payment of accounts, the Minister of Finance may authorize the advance to the account from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of an amount sufficient to make the payment. This is already set out in the Financing Board. The advance shall be credited to the employment insurance account and shall be repaid in the time and manner and on the terms and conditions that the Minister of Finance may establish. We propose that these would not be reimbursable advances, but rather non-reimbursable payments drawn from the accumulated surplus. We are therefore proposing that Bill C-50 be amended to provide for the keeping of records on this accumulated surplus with interest until it is fully reimbursed, and that the surplus be regarded as a debt. We cannot forget what can be qualified as one of the major scandals in Canada's history. This government stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Employment Insurance Fund that should be used to protect the public. Let me explain, Mr. Chair. Political events around the world can sometimes be instructive. The great politician, Nelson Mandela, taught us that reconciliation has a price. The price of truth, and that reconciliation can only take place once the truth is established. What we are unveiling is not our opinion, but it's our assistance. We are calling for restoration of the truth. Moreover, and this is on page 119 of Bill C-50, the addition proposed with Section 70.1 provides for a $2 billion reserve fund. The reserve fund is insufficient. Mr. Chair, according to the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, it should be $15 billion. We propose, therefore, that this reserve be increased or that provision be made to add future annual surpluses to the reserve without affecting the balance of accounts. Still, with regard to Bill C-50, we propose that the appointment process for the Board of Directors and for the Chair of the Commission, this is covered by Sections 9 to 13 in the bill, be subject to the approval of the Standing Committee on Human Resources. This would make the process more transparent and more democratic. Lastly, the main message we wish to convey to members of Parliament at this meeting is that the creation of the Employment Insurance Financing Commission does not address the real problem. It means that over 50% of unemployed workers are not eligible for employment insurance benefits. These are the most recent statistics that have been released by the department. This is the most important issue for us, the central one, and the only one that truly warrants us fighting for. Whether or not the Employment Insurance Financing Commission is created, the employment insurance system must be improved. Sometimes in history, we must all work together, even for a very short time, to make progress on a social issue such as the Employment Insurance Plan, which protects workers in Canada. This is a highly political issue. And allow me to conclude on the following message. It is our sense that our responsibility is that we are appealing to the members and various parties.
Please try to keep it down. You'll have another chance when we get into the question and answer, but I don't want to rob the time from the committee members. We'll have now from the Gardner Foundation, we have John Dirksen and Sheila Robertson. The floor is yours. Robinson. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here with my colleague Sheila Robinson, representing the Gardner Foundation. In the February 26 budget, the Government of Canada announced an allocation of $20 million to endow the Gardner International Awards. Beginning in 2009, the awards will be renamed the Canada Gardner International Awards. An agreement has now been signed between the Foundation and the Canadian Institute of Health Research. The purpose of the allocation is twofold: to increase the value of the Gardner Awards to $100,000 each, in keeping with their stature and with the international competition. They have fallen behind, and awards are always recognized and identified with their country of origin, as are the Gardners. The last time the prizes were received an increase was in 1984 at $30,000, which is about the $100,000 value today. Secondly, we're going to establish for the first time an individual award for global health, the Canada Gardner Global Health Award, which will be the most prestigious in the world in this field. It will be directed at international scientists for discoveries or major advances in preventing and treating diseases in the developing world. The Gardner Awards are a national asset. They're Canada's only globally known and respected international prize of any kind. Gardner is the only national organization that consistently brings the world's best biomedical researchers to Canada to share their ideas and work with scientists across the country. It epitomizes the knowledge advantage. Canada has built a strong research foundation. Industry Canada wants to put in place programs that will inspire Canadians to perform at world-class levels of scientific excellence. The Gardners are a perfect example of such a program. Let me give you two discoveries that have led to enormous economic impact, all honorees of the Gardner Foundation. The whole current biotech industry rests on discoveries from the double helix through current discoveries like the microRNAs being honored this year. Dr. Bruce Chan of Winnipeg in the 60s developed a treatment for Rh-negative disease which killed babies born with life-threatening anemia. An off-spin is that Calgene is now Canada's most profitable biotech companies. Advantage Canada is committed to world-leading basic and applied research. Gardner recognizes, encourages, and celebrates such research, and in doing so fosters a culture of innovation in Canada. Who else in Canada provides a realistic and unbiased benchmark for Canada's leading scientists compared to the world's leading biomedical scientists? Bringing the best international scientists to meet and share their work with Canadians is what we do every year. Because biomedical research is international, global, it's important that we have such a set of awards. Gardner does this through its national program and by its prestigious Medical Advisory Board. Gardner winners have also become involved every year in the scientific community, bringing the most recent knowledge to the fingertips of our scientists and graduate students. The experience of Gardner Foundation could also act as a model to the development of other international science awards, synergistic with Canada's overall science and technology strategies and priorities, using similar arm's-length adjudication procedures. James Arthur Gardner started the Foundation 48 years ago to reward international scientists for discoveries. An external measure of that stature is that of the 293 individuals from 13 countries, including 42 Canadians, who have received Gardner Awards, 70 have later won the Nobel Prize. Even more remarkable is that in the past 6 years, 11 of the 14 Nobel Prizes in medicine have gone to former Gardner awardees. Paul Nurse, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, a Gardner Nobel laureate, said, "The Gardner Award is one of the world's greatest biomedical research prizes. Where it leads, others follow, including the Nobel committees in Stockholm." The core mandate of the Foundation is to select annual Gardner International awardees. It has a respected two-stage jury system, which involves a Canadian medical review panel with members from coast to coast. And the second stage involves the Medical Advisory Board, which is half international, half Canadian, has on it 5 Nobel laureates and prestigious representatives from international institutions. We not only give the prizes, but we have a national program which extends from Vancouver to St. John's every year in October. We have student outreach programs to senior high school students in order to inspire them into the science and professional careers. We speak to the public, and so that there's a major interaction at all levels with Canadian citizenry. We now also are on the verge of introducing a global health prize. Canada has significant international reputation in the global health field. No individual prize exists, and this allows a platform to be built within Canada, and we believe within the city, which will platform and highlight global health advances in communicable diseases and population health and in the environmental health issue. Recently, our board has changed from a family to a public board and has representatives on it from Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Alberta, and British Columbia, and we are developing many new partnerships. The future. The awards will continue the successful, rigorous selection process, and we will not alter that value which has served us well. Second, we will embark on a fundraising campaign from the provinces and from the private sector to add to the costs related to our foundation. The government grant provides the endowment for the prizes, but we need to carry out our programs or events and our professional activities. We're glad to say that the government of Alberta has already contributed $2 million in this direction, and we hope that other provinces will follow. Every year, $700,000 is raised from corporations and institutions across the land. And then finally, we believe that the Global Health Award will be a new platform for Canada in the international health field. So we look forward to a future, especially next year when we will celebrate our 50th anniversary with major events across the country dealing with cancer, with commercialization, with innovation, with childhood diseases, and other aspects. It may be the most spectacular year in health sciences that this country has ever had. We believe strongly that the support of the Gardner Foundation is of value to every Canadian in terms of development of science culture, science literacy in Canada, the development of skilled personnel in the life sciences and health research and professions, and we believe that we'll increase public awareness and stimulate the highest level of international excellence in research. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on. We have with us Status Now campaign in defense of undocumented immigrants, Ms. Saraya. I'm not sure I pronounced that right, but the floor is yours. 7 minutes.
Zerahi, thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Status Now campaign in defense of undocumented immigrants. Our campaign includes various national, regional, local immigrant refugee organizations, community organizations, trade unions, and agencies. We're extremely concerned with the proposed amendments to the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act as part of the Federal Budget Bill C-50. Throughout the past month, community groups have united across linguistic, cultural, and ethnic lines, Portuguese, South Asian, Arab, Hispanic, Chinese communities working in partnership with trade unions and lawyers association in a united campaign in opposition to the proposed immigration amendments. Our communities are extremely disturbed to see that such important changes to IRPA are being pushed through as part of the federal budget and are being reviewed by the Standing Committee on Finance rather than the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. We're specifically concerned with the lack of transparency and the failure on the part of the government to conduct thorough community consultations prior to the introduction of these amendments. Our recommendation is to separate the immigration amendments from the budget implementation bill and recommence the process by conducting in-depth nationwide community and immigration sector consultations under the guidance of the Standing Committee on Immigration. I won't go into the issue of the over 925,000 backlog, as my colleague Victor Wong has already addressed that. I'll say that these changes will not speed up the process of processing of applications. In fact, giving the minister the power to discard applications that meet all immigration requirements is unfair, arbitrary, and open to abuse. We believe that if the minister wants to speed up the application process, she should hire more people to review the applications and not simply refuse to look at applications. People who have been waiting for years in the system deserve to have their application looked at. Our recommendation is to gear the budget allocation to citizenship and immigration towards strengthening the capacity within the department to effectively eliminate the backlog in processing family reunification requests and permanent resident applications. Although the backlog is a justification used to push through these damaging changes, upon closer examination of the facts, it becomes evident that the real issue at stake is not the application processing times, but the low annual targets we have set for permanent residents entering the country. My colleague, Mr. Wong, has already addressed the numbers. Once again, I'd like to reiterate the recommendation to increase the annual immigration target range from 240,000 to 265,000 to the range of 300,000 to 330,000, which is around 1% of the Canadian population, to address this backlog. The proposed changes will give the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration unfettered power to decide what category of immigrants will be allowed to enter the country each year. The Minister has again and again ensured immigrant communities that there will be no discrimination, as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms will be respected. However, without an open and transparent democratic process in place to oversee the Minister's decision, certain groups of immigrants could easily be overlooked. Unfortunately, the Charter does not help potential immigrants trying to come to Canada. If the Minister's instructions is to fast-track temporary foreign work applicants from Thailand as opposed to parents coming from India or Iran, the Charter cannot prevent her from doing so. We have been told that the Minister's instructions will not allow the Minister to intervene in individual cases. However, by changing just one word in the Act, from shall to may, applicants can meet all requirements, receive sufficient points, and still be rejected. This simple word change renders the entire point system and its objective non-discriminatory criteria meaningless. New immigrants will never have an assurance that if they meet the necessary criteria to come to Canada as permanent residents, they will be granted entry. These new powers are dangerous. With no set criteria, there is far too much room for arbitrary or discriminatory decision-making. Our recommendation is to implement an immigration strategy that is open, transparent, and accountable, with criteria for permanent residency that is clear and does not grant unfettered power to a single minister. We have tremendous concerns about the lack of transparency within these proposed amendments. Under this new system, annual immigration priorities and categories will not be reviewed and debated within the Standing Committee on Immigration, but will be made solely by the Minister in her office and then published in the Canada Gazette. The publication may occur after the instructions come into effect, which would prevent consultation. The Minister will have the authority to develop instructions that are not subjected to debate or approval in Parliament. In this scenario, elected members of Parliament and the House of Commons will have no say over these instructions. For many members of immigrant communities who have come to Canada to escape oppressive regimes, that reject democratic involvement, it is very concerning to see that here in Canada, we're debating measures which will serve to discard the democratic procedures and concentrate the power in the hands of a single elected official. We have been told that the proposed immigration amendments will not affect families from being able to unite under humanitarian and compassionate grounds. However, even a cursory glance at the legislation demonstrates that the minister and her officials no longer have to consider applications under the humanitarian and compassionate grounds if the family member is outside of Canada. This will mean that the humanitarian and compassionate application, which is the only course for many refugees' families to reunite, will no longer be a viable option. In addition, we're concerned about the current policy shift of the Ministry of Immigration, whereby immigrants are increasingly being understood and treated as cheap and exploitable labor to be brought here through temporary visas. In fact, the most prevalent argument made in favor of these amendments is that they will give flexibility to visa officers to bring in skilled workers to meet labor needs. Employers claim labor shortages of both high-skilled and low-skilled workers. Much of this perceived labor shortage is occurring in a lower-skilled sector. Under the existing point system, low-skilled workers will never have enough points to stay in Canada as permanent residents and never qualify as citizens or be able to bring their families to Canada. Our recommendation is that the government needs to reform the requirements under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and bring workers to Canada permanently rather than rushing in these potential immigrants as temporary, cheap laborers. All right, just a couple more points. Very quickly. A couple of recommendations. We need to implement a full and inclusive and accessible regularization program to address the issue of undocumented workers, because we already have workers in this country providing the labors for many of these industries. And I'll conclude by saying that it is true that our current immigration system is broken, but if these amendments go through, the immigration system will no longer be broken, but shattered beyond repair.
Thank you. And your presentation, we'll get it distributed in both official languages, so the committee will be able to follow it in detail. So now we have from the Canadian Federation of Students. We have Amanda Aziz. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak here today. And we're obviously here to speak today about Bill C-50's implications on Canadian student financial assistance. The Canadian Federation of Students is Canada's largest students' organization. We represent undergraduate and graduate students at Canada's public universities and college, both small and large. And altogether, we unite over 500,000 students on campaigns for affordable, high-quality post-secondary education. One of our longest-standing campaigns is for a national system of student grants. The upfront financial barriers to post-secondary education play a major role in explaining the unacceptable participation gap between families in the lowest and highest income quartiles. Grants are a vital tool for giving students and their families the help they need to afford post-secondary education in the face of skyrocketing tuition fees and other costs. Perhaps more importantly, grants, unlike loans, provide that help without mortgaging the future of Canada's young educated workers. Student debt owed to the federal government through the Canada Student Loans Program is increasing at $18 per second, more than $1.5 million a day. In July this year, student loans owing to the federal government will surpass $13 billion. That doesn't include student loan debt owed to provincial governments, which could add at least $7 billion more to the debt, nor does it include debt from private sources such as banks. In provinces where tuition fees are the highest, average student debt is more than $28,000, according to the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission. This is an embarrassment for a country as rich as Canada. 10 years ago, the federal government created the Millennium Scholarship Foundation and endowed it with $2.5 billion. The size and scope of this investment should be recognized as a substantial and well-meaning attempt at reducing student debt and improving access to post-secondary education. Sadly, the foundation was a flawed mechanism for social programming and by most accounts failed to deliver much relief to Canadian students. Provincial governments widely abused the funding from the Millennium Foundation, seeing it as a slush fund for their own experiments or tangential priorities. As an arm's-length and private organization, the Foundation was never accountable nor transparent, and it used this untouchable status for deeply political ends that in most cases ran contrary to its mandate to improve access to post-secondary education. It provided political cover for increased tuition fees, and it enriched former employees with lucrative contracts. It also paid out nearly $250,000 in subsidies to organizations that supported its renewal. We could argue for hours about whether or not the government should have seen this coming, but I'm here today to suggest that the best intentions led to a failed experiment. This government was right to listen to expert advice and go in a different direction. The proposed Canada Student Grant Program will avoid so many of the pitfalls of its predecessor and will serve as a predictable and stable funding source for Canada's students. Students need non-repayable grants, and that's not the issue. As the government has recognized in Budget 2008, the issue is how grants are administered by this government, and the record is clear. The Millennium Scholarship Foundation has failed in doing so, and there is a more effective way. In the coming months and years, we look forward to providing feedback about how to maximize the new grant's effectiveness and reach. But in the meantime, I encourage all parties to implement budget legislation to wind down the Millennium Scholarship Foundation. I assure you, with an HRSDC-administered program in its place, students will not miss it. In the last few minutes I have, I want to talk about something that this bill doesn't specifically address, but which should be among the top priorities when debating post-secondary education policy, and that's the need for this government to invest in education for Aboriginal people. The gap that exists between low and high-income Canadians participating in post-secondary education is even more pronounced between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians. Completion rates for high school, university, and to a lesser extent college for Aboriginal people lag far behind those for non-Aboriginal Canadians. And while this gap continues to widen, the population growth of Aboriginal people in Canada is skyrocketing. A study commissioned in 2006 found that over 30% of the Aboriginal population is under 24 years old. Despite these demographics, funding for Aboriginal students has not increased, and in fact, funding for the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs post-secondary program has remained virtually stagnant since 1996, with an inadequate 2% annual increase cap. The Assembly of First Nations estimates that more than 13,000 eligible students in the last 6 years alone have been denied funding to participate in post-secondary studies. Despite the recommendations in the 6th report of the Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development last June, Budget 2008 delivered no new funding for Aboriginal learners and continues the cap on funding increases in INAC's post-secondary program. We recommend that the federal government immediately remove the funding cap on the post-secondary student support program and explore opportunities to provide support for non-status and Métis students who are currently not eligible for support under INAC's post-secondary education program. So in closing, I just want to thank the committee again for the chance to speak today and introduce Ian Boyko here to my right, who's the Government Relations Officer. Obviously, there's many issues in the budget that the time limit didn't allow us to discuss, but I do look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to our last presenter, Canadian Labour Congress. We have Andrew Jackson. The floor is yours, 7 minutes, and then we'll move to question and answer.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm glad you got your water back and we can appear. I just, for the record, would state that the CLC would support removing the immigration provisions of this bill for separate consideration and consultation. I probably won't have time to speak to it, but we'd also be very critical of the introduction of tax-free savings account, which we'd see as a major sort of step over the long term towards freeing investment income of taxation and potentially a very costly long-term measure. That said, I will focus my remarks on the EI Financing Board, and I agree with much of what was said. I think the key change and objective in the bill is to ensure that future surpluses in the EI account moving forward could be used to reduce premiums or, for that matter, enhance benefits. I think that in itself, in isolation, is probably a very modest improvement from the status quo. But it's really sort of turning a page on history, which I think can't be turned at this point, and we have to come to grips with the legacy of the past decade. As members probably know, in the Supreme Court next week, they have agreed to hear a case on the legality of collecting a $54 billion accumulated surplus in the EI account. The federal government's case is that it was constitutional for them to levy a payroll tax, as indeed is the case. The question is, if the previous federal government had levied a tax to reduce the deficit and debt, would they have chosen the EI premium to do so? I think not. Considered in isolation, it's a very regressive tax. Its regressivity is justified in the EI context by the fact that benefits are proportional to premiums paid and income covered. But the second key point would be that for several years from the mid to the late 1990s, when ministers were questioned about the accumulating surplus in the EI account, which, let's not forget, was produced by the fact we had a freeze on the level, the maximum benefit for 10 years. So the level of the maximum benefit was reduced by 30%. We had a shift to an hours-based system, so a lot less eligibility into the program. The justification for building up that surplus was that the accumulated EI surplus would remain in place to backstop the EI account itself. So if we went into a recession, we went into a downturn, we wouldn't be having to reduce premiums or increase premiums or reduce benefits. So if we're just turning the page, where are we? We sit with a $54 billion surplus still sitting in an EI account completely integrated with the public accounts, and we're creating a whole new account, which, by the way, is also completely integrated into the public accounts, which manages a reserve fund with the reserve to be set not by the new board but by the government, by regulation. So what has really changed? As far as I can see, the only thing that's really changed is if that account accumulates a surplus moving forward, indeed that surplus will be retained. But I guess for our part, we say we're not really prepared just to wave goodbye to that $54 billion and forget the history of how it was collected. At an absolute minimum, the reserve in the new account should be sufficient to fully backstop the EI fund in the event of a recession. Now, that doesn't cost you $54 billion, but it costs probably in the range of $10 to $15 billion, according to expert calculations. The other point I want to submit, I think the intent of the legislation, and quite rightly so, is to ensure that the new EI Financing Board has no role at all in setting the basic parameters of the EI program, doesn't have anything to say about how the program is delivered. It's only about premium setting. And I think that is the right approach and the intention is correct. However, in our submission, we do suggest specific wording to clarify that the new board should not do analysis around the program and its impact and delivery. That should remain the property of Human Resources and Social Development Canada, nor should it be making any suggestions as to how the premium should be divided as between workers and employers. Some people might have noticed quite an active employer constituency to reduce the employer premium and shift it onto workers. I think it's essential to make sure that that remains a political decision and not within the purview of the new board. So I think those are the most important points, that we need a reserve fund which does allow unemployment insurance to act in a counter-cyclical fashion if and perhaps when we hit a recession, and to ensure that the new board indeed plays an extremely narrowly defined and limited role. I think it's also important that we ensure that there is still full ministerial accountability for the employment insurance program and how it operates, and that separating the fund doesn't remove the minister of responsibility and accountability to the House for the program. If I have just a minute to speak to the 1 minute, okay, just get it off my chest on the tax-free savings accounts. I mean, the key point here is, I think, this is the thin end of the wedge. And if you allow a $5,000 contribution to those accounts to ramp up year after year after year, you're introducing potentially over time a savings vehicle that could begin to match RRSPs in its size and importance. The very affluent in our society, the only ones who have maxed out their RRSP savings, they're really the only ones who are going to take advantage of this new fund, at least above a certain limited low threshold. I do think there are arguments for having some element of savings income free of tax. I think the fact that older Canadians who are in a low-income situation would qualify for the guaranteed income supplement and therefore penalize themselves if they save is a problem which should be addressed. The people on social assistance should be allowed to, I think, have modest amounts of saving. So having a modest amount of savings tax-free is one thing, but to have something that ramps up year after year after year to where it becomes a significant tax shelter is another. Thank you.
Thank you. You've made your point. I just want to ask the committee, we are going to be a little tight on time, but if you want a 7-minute first round, or do we want to go 5 and allow more? 7? I'm looking for consensus. Okay, Mr. McCallum, start. 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I think I will use my time on two issues, the immigration question and the EI. And on immigration, I would say to Victor Wong and to Ms. Zarehi, if I'm saying your name correctly, I basically agree with the thrust of what you're saying. Mr. Wong, you represent the Chinese-Canadian National Council, and my riding's 38% Chinese people, so what you say is what I'm hearing, and I definitely agree that I've used the term, it treats immigrants like commodities rather than people, and you use the term temp agency. I think it's the same thrust. And I'd like to ask one question. I don't think I heard either of you mention it, but it's no longer, the government is no longer obliged to accept applications from outside Canada on human and compassionate grounds. Could either or both of you give your view on that concisely?
Well, it's very simple. I did briefly address it, but I addressed a lot of points. And the point is the humanitarian and compassionate grounds outside of Canada application is the only application that is available for many categories of immigrants to be reunited with their families, including people who are here as refugees and need to be reunited with siblings that were not included in the initial refugee claims because of certain conditions. So a lot of families in Canada are going to be unable to finally be reunited with their siblings, with their children, with their spouses, because we will no longer have the minister be required to review humanitarian and compassionate applications if they're outside the country.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
Well, for some separated children, for example, separated refugee children, the agency is about the only option that they have to reunite their families. And if you close off, applications from outside the country, well, you're closing off that family reunification. We're a community that's gone through family separation by legislation, and that was the Chinese Exclusion Act. There's no reason for the government to be introducing this because from the stats, we're talking about maybe 1,000 cases. So, again, anytime we restrict immigration, we find that a lot of people just fall through the cracks.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned this, that if you put very few resources into the system, you're not going to get a big improvement in the treatment of the backlog. You need to put significant resources. If you put very few and you fast-track one group, by definition, you're going to slow-track another group, in this case, I think, family. But since my time is limited, let me now move on to EI and one particular aspect of EI. And in a sense, we have big business sitting across the table from big labor over there. So perhaps I could focus on these two gentlemen and see the degree to which you may agree or disagree. My concern with the new EI arrangement is not quite what I heard either of you say, but it is that the system could become what economists call pro-cyclical. In other words, and the actuaries agree with this, so it must be right. The actuaries say that the EI account should be balanced over the business cycle, so that when you have a recession, whether because of poor conservative policy or any other reason, you don't immediately have to jack up the premiums in order to keep it in balance. But so you would run deficits, EI deficits during recessions, surpluses during good times, you'd balance over the cycle. The problem with this government proposal, it seems to me, is that they force premiums to react almost immediately to past or future perceived or possible deficits, so that you're going to have a big jack-up in premiums during the worst recessionary times under this new system, and that leads to bad economic policy. And it's not just me saying that, it's the actuaries are also saying the same thing. So I wonder if I could ask each of the two of you if you have a view on that point.
Well, I agree absolutely that we should have a fund with a sufficient reserve in it that we can go through recessions. And we don't need to build up that reserve now because we have it. We're more than enough for it. My understanding of the bill, though, Mr. McCallum, is that the change, the parameters for premium changes from year to year are exactly unchanged from what was in place under your government. So, I mean, I think the question is why did, I mean, there's no real difference other than the $2 billion is there to backstop it.
Real difference in what?
But the cap on premium changes from one year to the next, which is 15 cents per $100 is the same under the new as the old system. So I just wish you'd changed it when you had the chance. I guess is the point.
Well, if I may, I think on this one, I don't think there's a huge amount of difference between us. The important point here is we're at least setting up an arm's length agency to make those decisions. Whether that independent board is going to be able to set rates, in a counter-cyclical as opposed to pro-cyclical fashion depends essentially on the size of the reserve. So I think there is some discussion and concern about, is $2 billion a sufficient initial amount to have as a reserve? I don't have a particular number in mind. I think $2 billion could be enough, but it depends on the rules that are there, in terms of, the cap on changes and things like that. So that's more a detailed design issue. I think we're more concerned with the principle. At least we're getting the arm's length agency, and we can build better reforms from there.
I actually think it's an extremely important issue because otherwise we could be saddled with a new premium setting method which makes recessions more severe than they otherwise would be.
Well, I think putting that decision into an independent arm's length body is going to lead to better decisions that are likely to be more counter-cyclical because they're going to be made by the people who are going to be affected by them.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move on to Ms. Jacquette. The floor is yours, 7 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Liberals brought up the issue of employment insurance, but I think they forgot to talk about those who rely on employment insurance. My question is for Mr. Serret. What figures in the law and the $2 billion surplus, what will be the consequences on the system as regards the members who it affects? As you know, the rules have been tightened, the weeks of eligibility have been increased, premiums and benefits are not as high as they should be. Is there a way to enhance this system, given the fact that there's now been a cap set at $2 billion? Currently, with the establishment of premium rates in the current system, and that alone will generate surpluses. We are talking about a $3 billion surplus as of the end of March 2007. Those surpluses are accounted for and are included in the 11th report of the Human Resources Report. To date, the establishment of premium rates, which I think is set at about $1.93, is much lower than the rates that were established 15 years ago. Now, given the surpluses and given those rates, it is possible to enhance the EI system to such an extent that eligibility rules could be softened. This is not a joke. This is the reality in other countries. In fact, this very same report that the department has just issued states that the surplus is about 46 per. That is, rather, there would still be a surplus if only 46.1% were to contribute. There are 46% rather who are eligible to EI benefits. Therefore, 54% are not eligible. This affects those who are working on short-term contracts and who are unable to amass the necessary amount of hours. That's the message that we had tried to convey. Having an independent account is a step in the right direction. We cannot allow for the same scandal that occurred a few years ago to happen again. We are talking about the contributions and money of employees and employers. All of those amounts were confiscated. Never can that happen again. But with the establishment of the financing board and through parliamentarians, we have to find a way of improving the system. Having an eligibility rate of 46.1% is unacceptable. Eligibility rules have to be made more lax. Parliamentarians must keep this in mind. There are people who are in need of benefits, and we must never forget that $54 billion of our contributions made by workers and employers, was stolen. I hope that MPs, I hope the majority of MPs, will realize that such a scandal will never recur. Section 80 of the current piece of legislation, as well as in the amendments that have been proposed, would allow for a loan to be made with interest to the reserve. Therefore, in other words, creditors owe $54 billion. Each time the reserve is in deficit, the government has a responsibility to reimburse the fund. Mr. Jackson, my question is for you. We've heard from Association of Actuaries who say that when companies have a difficulty in reimbursing, well, what would be the impact, given the current recession, if the $2 billion on the reserve is actually carried through? What will be the effect on the manufacturing sector?
I'm having difficulty myself working out just precisely how this new fund would set the premiums in the kind of economic context moving forward. I guess the new board will have to set the premium on a forward-looking basis. So what's going to balance the account in the coming year, and establish a reserve fund which will be initially $2 billion, or the government is allocating. I guess it really remains up to the board how big a reserve fund they think will need to be built up, although that's going to be set by the government. But certainly, if we enter into a recession next year, I think, as Mr. McCallum said, the premiums would have to rise. Certainly, if it was a recession that went on for more than a year or two. So, the calculations I've seen, I guess, are the ones the chief actuaries quote, are based on historical experience. If we went into a fairly prolonged and severe recession, then you need a reserve fund in the order of 10 to 15 billion, and those numbers are several years old. So, I suspect it would be on the higher end. So, I don't think $2 billion. I think the intent here is more that since the new premium setting mechanism came in, the intent was to balance funds, but in fact there's been a $1 billion surplus run while we were notionally sort of balancing. And I think the intent here is if you get a bit of an overshoot, that it's not lost to the EI system more than it is to sort of create a large reserve fund to ride us out through recessions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Wallace, you have 7 minutes.
And I'm sharing my time with Mr. Dykstra.
Okay, that's fine.
But I think NDPs first, normally. No?
I don't believe so.
That's,
No, I'll chair. I'll chair the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the time. I'll be about 3 minutes, and I'll be very quick. So I need fairly significant, quick answers from you. I want to thank you all for coming here. Just a clarification: is it Ms. Zahir? How do you say it? Zahiri. So you're here with the campaign in defense of undocumented immigrants. When you say undocumented, another word would be illegal. They're here illegally then, is that correct?
We mean those are the people who've fallen through the cracks of the immigration system or are between status.
So they don't have any legal status which would make them illegal. Would that not be correct?
That would mean that they've fallen out of status.
Okay, so Ms. Hall Finley asked some questions of a Mrs. Andrea Lyon, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister at our last meeting. And I want to quote what she had said and get your response. First of all, there's no amendments you're recommending in here. You'd like it removed from the bill. Is that an accurate statement?
That is accurate.
Okay. And Mr. Wong, you would say the same thing? Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
That's not going to happen. But the well, you asked about the H&C applications, so the humanitarian compassionate applications, and Ms. Finley, Hall Finley, asked, does that? Yes, but the concern is prohibition is once outside of the country. And Ms. Andrea Lyons said it is not a prohibition, and she goes on to explain that. And then Ms. Finley asks again, so again, is there a concern about discretion? Is your understanding the discretion would have to be used in the case you just described where somebody has applied only after being accepted for on another basis? And Ms. Lyon, certainly the intention of this particular provision is not to deny H&C access of those deserving of H&C. Those people deserving it will continue to have their applications heard in normal manner and normal fashion. Now, what in here, based on a bureaucrat telling us that this is the way it's going to be, what in here is different than what she's been telling this committee at the last meeting?
I think we all like to think that everybody has the best intentions, but unfortunately there's a difference between intentions and how things are written in the law and in the bill. And we've heard again and again legal opinions from lawyers, and certainly I am not a lawyer, so I am not here to present a legal opinion. Right. But again and again we've heard legal opinions from the Canadian Bar Association, from lawyers in the community, that these amendments could be read.
Could be.
Exactly, interpret. And that's exactly the problem with the law and with these amendments and the way that they're being pushed through. Because there isn't enough community consultations, there's a lot of doors that are still open. There's a lot that still needs to be reviewed and looked at. And the way the wording is, it could be read that humanitarian and compassionate applications outside of the country may not be looked at.
I have a very quick question for you.
Absolutely.
As a member of Parliament, a couple came to see me. They had exhausted their 2 or 3 refugee status applications.
You can only do one in Canada.
Well, there's appeal. They had their appeal. I had a discussion with them, and I said, you know, how did you get here? They said, well, they lied to get in the country. And they wanted their MP to help them. Is your organization supporting people who've lied to get into Canada?
First of all, we're working on a campaign, and the campaign's points of unity is opposition to Bill C-50 at this moment, and a regularization program that meets the needs of undocumented workers.
Thank you. Thank you.
But
that's my time. I'm going to share my time.
That's fine. Mr. Dexter,
I just wanted to continue on the conversation. The one difficulty I guess I have, and I just wanted to ask you, every single piece of legislation that comes forward, and it doesn't matter whether it's been a Liberal government or whether it's been a Conservative government, you can make the claim that you've made, that the interpretation of the law or of the new legislation could be one thing or it could be another. In fact, I guess that's why we have a court system here in this country to potentially challenge those issues. But could you tell me if you at least had a chance to read or watch the response? It doesn't sound like you trust the minister on this. So I want to get whether or not you've had a chance to read the transcripts. I mean, I'm happy to provide them for you. Ms. Lyon was very, very clear in terms of her responses. Are you saying that the ministry hasn't prepared this documentation that well either and not necessarily should be trusted?
I've heard Minister Finley address questions around this issue again and again in different settings, as well as other discussions. I don't feel that I need the transcripts to read it again, but at the same...
You haven't heard from Ms. Lyon? Have you read Ms. Lyon's documentation? She spent an hour here being grilled by the 12 of us. Oh, sorry, the 13 of us. Have you had a chance to read her perspective on this?
I have not had a chance to read her perspective on it, but at the same time,
hold on a second. Hold on, I'm asking the question.
You ask the question and I get to respond.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Go ahead. You come here and you want to challenge this legislation. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
But you come here, you haven't read what was documented here by the official in the ministry who's responsible for this, and you say that we need to remove this from finance because we need to do more research on this with the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration. Well, those people have gone, whether it's across the country or in front of panels like this and at that other ministry, to determine this. So what I can't understand is how in fact you could have more consultations on this and somehow come back to the ministry who's going to write the legislation anyway and say, well, now I like the legislation or I like the stuff that's been written after further consultation, when in fact she's come here to clarify every single point that you made here today.
Well, first of all, I'm not the person that comes up with the legal opinion.
We'll allow her to listen to
Do
go
you
ahead.
get to respond?
No, you can answer the question, and I'll ask the members to just keep quiet while we listen to the answer.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm not the person within our organization that comes up with a legal opinion. I leave that to the lawyers. My responsibility is then to communicate that legal opinion in an easy to understand, plain language way to the communities that are affected. Now, our legal opinions have again and again told us that this is the interpretation. You're telling us, and the Ministry of Immigration has told us, trust us. That's what we're hearing. We're hearing, trust our interpretation, trust what we're saying, we're the good guys, we're going to interpret this in a way that will be beneficial to the communities. Well, unfortunately, our communities are saying, no, we don't agree with your interpretation. We don't want to get rid of the democratic involvement of committees like the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. We want these things to be reviewed every time a decision is made. We don't want to see a decision in the Gazette afterwards and then have to shrug our shoulders and say, well, the minister made it. I'm sure she had great intentions.
That's not what I said. I said that the ministry officials came here. You've said to this group that you didn't even read what she had to say. So you want more. You want to do more research, even though the materials that have been prepared, the ADM that was here to respond to those questions, you're saying, well, we need to have more discussions, but you haven't even listened or met with the individual who's responsible for the department who has put this legislation together.
Okay. Excuse me. We'll leave it at that before it deteriorates any further, and the time is gone. Ms. Chow, the floor is yours.
I have two areas, both the EI and immigration. It's interesting, it does actually connect with each other because $54 billion, imagine the kind of funds that we could use to retrain workers that are unemployed in the forestry, the manufacturing industry, the auto plant, the various, whether it's in Quebec, the older workers, young people that can get the apprenticeship training. It's phenomenal money, and that dollar really belongs to the workers and the workers alone, and it shouldn't be just taken away. But it connects with the immigration piece because what is happening is that the more we have more and more temporary foreign workers coming into this country, and is driving down the wages of ordinary Canadians. And we are in fact seeing an immigrant woman, for example, immigrant women are earning 56 cents per dollar that is being earned by a Canadian-born male. So you're seeing that as more workers are not entitled to their EI benefits, as the jobs are paying less, there's fewer manufacturing jobs, you are seeing more and more temporary foreign workers coming into Canada. So it is connected, and that is why tomorrow the NDP has an Opposition Day motion. We're going to spend the entire day in the House of Commons debating whether that the House have lost the confidence of this government, given that the government have failed to reform employment insurance to ensure that people who lose jobs are protected and trained. And that's an area I think I wouldn't mind some comments. But since the last exchange, I thought I should ask Ms. Sari, Seema, or maybe Mr. Wong, that will more temporary foreign workers, people that have precarious status in Canada, if C-50 generates more of those types of, quote, immigrants, would we in fact see more people going underground and therefore having more people disappearing? So far, the Auditor General said 41,000. Will we get more people going underground and therefore the Canadian Border Service Agency is going to have even harder time to keep track of where the immigrants are, or the undocumented workers maybe. So perhaps Ms. Sari can answer the question?
Well, clearly, that's exactly the connection that we are seeing. If we don't do something to fix the system at the front end, we're going to have more people falling through the cracks, and then we have to devote more resources at the back end. Today, we read a press release issued by Minister Stockwell Day complimenting CBSA for arresting undocumented workers in a factory outside of the Greater Toronto area. And what we're seeing is, at the same time that we're deporting workers, our country is speaking out again and again for the needs of more laborers to come in to provide those shortages of the workers that we're deporting. Definitely we need to see the connection here. C-50 is going to bring more temporary foreign workers into Canada on 2-year periods. After that time, they're going to fall through the cracks again, and we're going to exacerbate the crisis of undocumented immigrants.
Mr. Patterson?
Just a quick point. The government has introduced the Canadian Experience class to target students and high-skilled workers, but it excludes the lower-skilled workers. So it puts them makes them more vulnerable to exploitation. So that's why our recommendation is that in our comprehensive immigration plan, that we offer a clear path to legal status and citizenship for all workers. Thank you.
Does Mr. Pierre Craig want to answer the EI question?
And I think Mr. Stewart Patterson had an answer there as well.
Just a quick point, if I may, on this issue of temporary workers, because in my view, I think some of the criticism of the bill is is this going to lead to more temporary workers? In my view, one of the reasons we've had such a surge in temporary workers is because we can't get permanent migrants through the system. I heard of a major project in the resource sector that's in the planning stages right now, where the human resource planning assumption is that they're going to have to bring in half the workers on a temporary basis because they can't get them in time through the permanent system. This is a tragic lost opportunity for our country. We should be getting these people here on a permanent basis.
Is the answer really, shouldn't there be more training, taking the funds from the EI to do the training so that the unemployed manufacturing workers that are now on the street or the forestry workers can be retrained? Number one. Number two, should we not change the point system and actually allowed some of those people to come into Canada? Right now, the skilled labor, unless they have degrees and speak fluent English, those are not the type of workers you necessarily are looking for. We need carpenters, for example. Carpenters don't have enough points to come into Canada. So yes, we're all for changing the point system, but this is not what C-50 is doing. C-50 is basically allowing the minister to bring people and move categories of people up and down. It's not changing the point system. So I don't see how that would necessarily make the system any better.
If I may, I think what it provides is some discretion to enable us to react to labor market conditions. But I agree with my colleagues here that I think Canada should be trying to attract more people. On the other hand, I also agree with you that as we bring people into the country, we do need to make sure that we are integrating, enabling them to integrate as quickly as possible and move into our economic mainstream. And I think that's been a flaw of public policy, over the past years, that we're not doing a good enough job. You look at the income results of immigrants and what's happened over the past 10 or 20 years. We're seeing those results deteriorate rather than improve. So yes, there are issues that need to be dealt with. But the first thing we've got to deal with is to make it possible for more of the skilled people that Canada does need right now to move into this country on a permanent basis and not on a temporary basis.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to Mr. McKay. 5 minutes now. We're in the 5-minute round.
My precious few seconds. I wanted to carry on the conversation that Mr. McCallum was having with Mr. Stewart Patterson and Mr. Jackson. And that was to the effect that, this EI proposal strikes me as, if you will, a half-pregnant solution. It doesn't put in sufficient amount of money, notional or real, into the fund in order to be able to do the counter-cyclical things that Mr. McCallum and you were talking about. And so really having $2 billion there is really almost a waste, because it really is the national treasury that stands behind the whole thing in any event.
So I'd be interested in your views as to whether, if this is in fact to operate as a true arm's length entity, whether it would be in the both business interests and in labor interests to be serious about this and actually put $15 billion into it, much like the actuaries want to happen, and do the counter-cyclical so that, you know, when things are going bad under conservative times, then you don't have to raise the premiums, and when they're going good under liberal times, you don't have to lower the premiums. So I'd be interested.
Tory times are tough times.
Yeah, I mean, you know, look at, we're going in the toilet. It's a conservative government. Mr. Andrews, I'll be interested. Mr. Jackson, I'll be interested in your view.
Are we going to?
Well, I basically agree with what you say. I mean, I think that's my interpretation. $2 billion. I think it's intended that it would set up enough to allow over time the new board to sort of not necessarily increase a premium immediately, because they built up the reserve, but we don't really know because we don't know what the size of the reserve fund is going to be, and that's going to continue to be set by the government. So I think the important thing is it's not so much the arm's length aspect of the fund that's important, as to have a genuinely separate fund that's separated from the public accounts. We do know that funds that are collected through the EI premium are being spent for EI purposes, and I think there's been a lot of consensus over the years on the employer and labour side.
In some respects, it's half pregnant on half pregnant, because they can only go down, up and down 15 cents. And so you make them arm's length, but then you take it all back. So what's the point of having the thing in the first place? Sorry, Mr. Stewart.
Well, if I may, I think you're right. I mean, first of all, the fact that you can only go up and down by a certain amount provides some welcome certainty and limits any kind of pro-cyclical damage. At the same time, Andrew Jackson mentioned earlier, as we were going through a period of extended economic growth, the estimates of what was needed to break even tended to lead to another surplus every year. So you'd made a conservative analysis. The result was, if we had been at arm's length a decade ago, we'd have a pretty healthy surplus by now. And I think my expectation would be that an arm's length rate-setting body is going to make that sort of conservative calculation, and over time you would build up what the board considered to be an adequate surplus to deal with the cyclical issue. I think there is legitimate discussion here in terms of, okay, what's the necessary seed capital, if I can put it that way, in order to ensure that we don't immediately have to get into making decisions about sort of raising premiums right away.
It just strikes me as an appearance of a solution, but not a real solution.
Well, I think one of the things we're agreed on here, and this is one step in the right direction. There is lots more that could be done, and there's a whole other policy debate about what is the purpose of the Employment Insurance Fund. I think some of the other witnesses have spoken to that. And there's a whole variety of different changes. We might want different changes to the purpose of the EI fund than others, but that's a separate policy debate, and I think it is one that needs to take place in this country.
If you will, I'd like to make a clarification. It is really important to understand, Mr. McKay, that the current setting of premium rates is the same that the board will able to exercise, and this has been since 2005. There's no difference. The only major fundamental difference is the establishment of an independent account. Now, if you were to compare the provisions in the proposed legislation and the current act, you will see the same wording. It can be found in Section 66 and 80. Right now, the money is there, and the needs of the Employment Insurance Fund are being met, and it is currently generating surpluses, and those surpluses are sufficient in order for the system to be improved. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Serret. I will also have a question for Mr. Stewart Patterson. Will the creation of this board, which is an independent board, be subject to consultation? Will there be regular consultations? Will there be involvement in general assemblies, for instance? Do you have an idea of the type of involvement that you will have? We hope that the establishment of the board will be as transparent and democratic as possible. There must be transparency in the appointment of members of the board of directors. Right now, it is a small committee that meets in camera. We hope that there will be a tripartite participation. Committees such as this one have to deal with those types of issues. And you have to approve the minister's decisions. It is absolutely essential that associations participate. We live in a society that allows for trade unions and employers' groups to be consulted. The process must be transparent. That is important to retain. I would, though, perhaps suggest that, despite what Mr. Jackson said, it would be important for the board to exercise analytical powers and carry out its own assessments in a transparent way. We hope that we too will be consulted. Transparency is crucial. What is your point of view, sir?
The process will be there'll be a nominating committee that would consist of the chair, and the worker and employer commissioners will be involved in the process. So I think there's some presumption that both the employer and worker sides will have some involvement. Okay. I think there'll be some screening. But
Monsieur Serré, vous avez parlé tout à l'heure.
Mr. Serré, earlier you talked about your expectations. You said that if deficits emerged in a given year, in fact, you talked about the $54 billion that was confiscated. Why aren't you calling for a reimbursement of that amount on an annual basis? For instance, why not reimburse the fund to the amount of $1 billion per year? Indeed, that's one possibility. What I am saying is that the $54 billion should have been accounted for. There should be interest charged on that amount. It is a debt that has been recorded. It should not establish the balance of accounts, or rather it should not affect the balance of accounts. The government has been reducing premium rates to the extent that it is no longer profitable. Workers in between jobs need those benefits. The fund is used to protect workers, and that is its ultimate objective.
Very quickly, the $54 billion surplus that's sitting in the EI account, in fact, interest is charged to that every year, and this bill does nothing to change that. It still sits there as a separate account integrated with the public accounts. We have Minister Flaherty confirmed to us in a letter the fact that if the EI program went into a deficit because of a recession and premium revenues didn't cover it, that the program would still be covered by the government and by the EI account. So I think that's the intent of the government. What this bill doesn't do, I think, is make clear that the EI surplus continues to exist and should continue to be available for EI purposes. Then, effectively, if you do that, you leave it up to future consideration on just how, we might actually deal with this problem. But you might end up with a Supreme Court decision in a few weeks that does throw this back to you. So you should reflect on it a bit.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to Mr. Del Mastro. You're splitting your time.
No, I'll be using
take all the time,
Mr. Chair. But I just
you'll be the last questioner of this round.
Certainly, just for the benefit of my colleagues that have missed the last 27 months of sound government, I just wanted to point out that we are running we are the only government, we're the only country in the G7, Mr. Chair, currently running fiscal surpluses while paying down debt. We have the hottest economy in the G7, as a matter of fact. We've created over 800,000 jobs in this country. Year-over-year increases of employment income of 4.5%, Mr. Chair. By virtually any measure, this government's financial record is outstanding. So I'm not exactly sure what the members opposite are discussing right now, but certainly Canada is in very good hands right now, Mr. Chair. Ms. Zerhi, I just wanted to, I asked a number of questions, just so you know. My grandparents immigrated to Canada. I'm very sensitive to immigration issues. I work on a number of immigration issues. I asked a number of questions to the Assistant Deputy Minister on concerns that I had. My first question to her was, could you elaborate on how the proposed changes will ensure that there's no discrimination based on race, ethnicity, place of origin, and so forth? Her response was, as I mentioned in response to one of the other questions, one of the important considerations we will need to take into account as we develop the instructions is our range of obligations and commitments internationally and domestically. Domestically, we have the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, and the objectives in it require us to ensure an appropriate balance among the various programs. We also have our obligations under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that ensures we apply the law and exercise all authority in full conformity with those rights and obligations, which explicitly prohibit any form of discrimination. Secondly, now you talked about people that fall through the cracks. Now I work a lot with people that have fallen through the cracks. The reason why people fall through the cracks is because what happens is they get frustrated sitting in the queue because we have a 6.5 to 8 year waiting list. So they jump the queue. So they wind up coming to Canada undocumented. And what I asked her is, there's various methods in trying to end run the system. It's because the system is grinding to a halt. It's because it's taking so long. I support these amendments which are aimed at speeding up the system. Can you elaborate on those people who have applied the current applications? Can you talk about how those applications will be dealt with, how the old system will be transformed, and how those people can rest assured that their place in the queue won't simply be forgotten? Response. The amendments contain some transition provisions that deal with applications both pre- and post-February 27. For those who are in the backlog, that is pre-February 27th backlog, the Minister's obligation and undertaking is to bring that number down as quickly as possible because it is that enormous amount that is constricting the overall system. By way of the budgetary amounts that were accorded to the Department, we will undertake a number of activities in terms of letter-writing campaigns to confirm people's interest in some of the administrative efficiency measures that the Minister talked about. There is the resource issue in terms of addressing resources in some of the higher volume missions such as Manila and Delhi, which to make sure they've got some of the tools to chew through the backlog as quickly as they can. Now, I also asked her, I said, can you please confirm for me, does the current system...
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, very quickly. Yes, indeed. Are you going to present your apologies to our witnesses? In fact, his statement has just taken away from their time to reply.
No, I'm not, because I think it's important. That's not a point of order. Go ahead,
This is my time, Mr. Craig.
And
Can you please confirm for me, does the system force immigrations to process applications for people who have either already immigrated to other nations or in fact who have died since they have put their application in? Do they remain in the queue and still required to be processed? Answer, we are obliged to process all applications. You mentioned a number of concerns. You mentioned the potential for discrimination. You talked about how people in the queue that are currently in the queue would be forgotten about. You talked about how the system would essentially give the minister undue ability. But what we heard in response was exactly opposite to that. That's from an impartial governmental official. What would you respond to that?
Okay, I'll start with your point about discrimination. I'll actually quote someone from the Canadian Arab Federation. We've heard from Mohamed Boujanan, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Arab Federation, citing again and again at press conferences that after September 11th, there's been a significant decrease in the number of permanent residency applications that have been granted to members of the Arab and Muslim communities.
But that's
this
true,
is prior to these changes.
because the system is grinding to a halt, Ms. Arias.
I think the reality is we agree that the system needs to be fixed, but the way that it needs to be fixed is by allocating more resources to process applications to ensure that every single application will be looked at. People who are frustrated sitting in a queue are not the people who are falling through the cracks and coming here without documentation. Oftentimes the people without documentation are people who will never, ever meet the current criteria under the Immigration Refugee Protection Act to come here. Those are the people that are providing the low-skilled, so-called low-skilled laborers here in the country. So I think there's a conflation there in terms of who's falling through the cracks. Also, people are falling through the cracks because some of our current immigration policies, such as the way our Immigration Refugee Board operates, are alienating to people. The application processes are difficult, and people don't have access to the legal remedies that they need to be able to successfully navigate those systems. Those are the kinds of people that are falling through.
Thank you very much. Our time is now gone, and we will pause for a couple of minutes as we ask the witnesses and thank them, first of all, for coming and for contributing. We will ask them now to dismiss themselves from the table, and we'll continue with some business of the committee. So thank you very much for coming, and with that, we'll have a 2-minute pause. Call the meeting back to order, and if you excuse me, if you would leave the room or get back to your seats, that'd be fine. Okay. You know, these 2-minute breaks are always dangerous, but nonetheless, if we just take that in the hallway or take your seats, we'd appreciate that. But first of all, we want to. I committed to the committee that I would talk to the chair of the Immigration Committee with regard to the letter that we had sent him, wanting their reply back to our committee by the 9th. He sent us a letter saying it would be the 16th. I've done that. He is working hard with his committee. I believe they're meeting this afternoon to try to accommodate us as much as he possibly can. I haven't heard exactly what's coming out of that, but he assured me they're going to try to work on that and accelerate that as much as possible. So I would suggest that we allow them to continue their work and see if they can accelerate to get back to us, and hopefully they'll have it before the break, and that's what his attempt was going to be. Mr. Massimo?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you ask it, you will seek it, or if you seek it, you will ask it, or whatever he says. I think we have consensus. I talked to some of the people around the table. The Immigration Committee is going to try with as much effort as possible to try and get the report out by the committed date of the 16th as per their letter of April 29th. And they'll use the week off for translation and should be ready by the 26th, the latest. So I would suggest that we move our meeting from the 26th to the 27th, and we go to clause by clause on Tuesday, the 27th of May. And we work around the clock if need be, but we're ready to have the bill out by the 27th of May.
I know we were attempting to get it through by the break, but that's actually not that bad. It's right after the break, and that maybe sounds reasonable to me. Ms. Chow?
I'm moving the motion that is in front of you from Mr. Mulcair that there will be a joint meeting.
After we have a motion on the floor right now, I believe,
okay.
On this, so we'll
can I amend that motion then?
You can try.
Yeah, okay. Can I hear the wording of that motion so I can amend it properly? And that I amended by attaching that there will be joint meetings to hear immigration, to have witnesses.
Okay.
And that so I'm just trying to migrate Mr. Mulcair's motion into the main one.
Yeah. Okay. I think we got the intent. We'll see that as an amendment. We'll move on. We'll ask for a vote on that amendment. The amendment she just made, which was to incorporate Mr. Mulcair's motion into this one, which is kind of a tricky way of getting it dealt with, but let's deal with it. All in favor of it? Opposed? It's defeated. Now we'll go back to the main motion. All in favor? That's yours. Opposed? And it's carried. Okay, so we'll go clause by clause on the 27th, and we will finish at that date.
3:30? 3:30? 3:30?
What time?
27th is a Tuesday, isn't it?
Yeah, but
by 3:30? 3:30. You want to go in the morning? I'm good in the morning. 10 o'clock? Okay, 10 o'clock. We'll attempt to get a room by 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. How's that? Okay. Very good. With that, okay.
Just not to overlap with them, so they'll be done by Monday at 5:30. So
very good.
Should be okay.
Thank you very much. Bells are about to ring. Meeting adjourned.
So at 10